the Evolution Security Podcast.
This episode of the Evolution Security Podcast is brought to you by Tenacor. Tenacor is an American design, development, manufacturing, and training company building products that work. They are innovators that come from a law enforcement and training background with years of experience. They produce industry-leading quintessential gear and build their clientele into capable protectors. Please visit tenacor.com and support their business as they support this community. Also like them on Facebook and follow on Instagram at Tenacor USA, Tenicor, Tenacor. Now for the good stuff. We are giving away a free Tenacor holster this week. Stay tuned after the podcast to find out how easy it is for you to win. Welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast, where we give you the knowledge and live training to protect yourself, your family, and your country. Find a class schedule and upcoming events on our website, evosec.org. That's www.evosec.org. Follow us on Instagram at evosecusa. Find other episodes of our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, where you can subscribe, review, and share with your friends. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. We've got a really awesome guest lined up for you this week, but before we get to that, we want to continue with our tradition here of reading a quote and having a little feedback on it. Eric, why don't you take that?
The way is in training. Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi was a very famous samurai who lived between 1584 and 1645. One of the things that was very interesting about Musashi was the fact that, he, of course, had, I believe it was 61 duels that were life or death duels, and he won them all. And more interesting to us is the fact that even in the 1600s, he identified an issue with training, and that was that there was a lot of showmanship and stuff, flowery martial arts that did not work in combat. So, he was very, very much into teaching what worked. So that was one of the reasons I chose that quote. So, Brian, what do you think about that?
Well, this makes a lot of sense to me because what I found, when I kind of came to finding a path of training, I really felt like, man, I'm really kicking it. I'm really getting after it. And when I realized that I was barely scratching the surface and really started training like daily, things changed. And I started to see a clearer path, and I started to understand how that worked. So for me, this is a truth in my life. I have found my way through training. So for me, the way is in training, and that's what I want to stay with. Got any thoughts on that, Aaron?
Sure, guys. I just have to say that after being on a hiatus from training, shooting, and martial arts, the last 5 years, I've gone through a resurgence. I think I mentioned that in a previous show. But I'm telling you, I am having a blast. Every moment that my eyes are open to something that I've never thought about, these many universes of knowledge that just appear. It's just so exciting. And regarding Eric talking about the quote, Musashi's life of determining that training in his time was full of showmanship and basically probably empty arts, right? Well, I've just watched you, Eric, and have learned from it through the years, basically stepping up and testing the different systems that you've been in, and just each time kind of throwing away the chaff and learning a new way. and getting to that next level. And I think that right now is an amazing time because of the trainers that we have that have really tested this stuff. And we're keying in to those trainers, and, I'm excited to expose those trainers, and some that are, really in the limelight and some that are not. But there are some really good trainers out there that are really testing the arts, and we're going to benefit from it. So that's those are my thoughts on it.
Well, we've got a guest this week. Chris LeBlanc was kind enough to spend some time with us. So without any more waiting, we're going to head right into that. Chris LeBlanc is a decorated SWAT officer with more than 20 years of experience in patrol and SWAT operations and use of force subjects. He works in the Southwest Washington and Portland metro area and is a martial arts and firearms instructor, focusing on enhancing clientele and close quarters capabilities for extreme close quarters encounters in both professional applications and personal defense. He is also a recipient of a Purple Heart, a Medal of Valor, and the State Law Enforcement Medal of Honor.
Hey, Chris, welcome to our show. Thanks for taking time away from your busy schedule to converse with us and our audience. First off, I want to kind of tell the audience a little bit about how we're connected. But first off, I'll let you answer. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you guys for having me.
Awesome. Well, listen, so for the audience, Chris and I met on a forum, a tactical and protection forum called Total Protection Interactive. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, it was kind of created by Craig and a couple of other guys. Am I correct on that? Craig Douglas, that is?
Yeah, we actually, a bunch of the original members of TPI had migrated over from something called self-defense forums. And I forgot whether that went down or whether there was some kind of flame war or something that happened that everybody got mad. I can't remember exactly, but everybody that was kind of interested in Craig's work all migrated over to TPI, and that's where the TPI community really started.
Okay, great. That I was thinking that was the case, but yeah, Chris and I had met on the forum, conversed here and there for several years before we actually met up. And one day we got together after I had PCS'd here to the Washington area, and Chris and I met one afternoon, and then we've taken ECQC together and EWO, or for those out there who aren't tracking those classes, Extreme Close Quarter Concepts and Edged Weapons Overview under Craig Douglas. So he and I have had a decent time training together in the past. But anyway, wanted to go ahead and get that out there for everybody. So anyway, Chris, how's your evening going?
So far, good. Got a day off. I've been having a lot of work lately, both work and training, and kind of burning the candle at both ends. So it's nice to have a little bit of a day off before I jump right back into some SWAT training tomorrow.
Great. Excellent. So for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself, around about where you're from and where you grew up.
Born and raised in Manchester, Connecticut, which is outside of Hartford. I came out here in my 20s, and here is the Portland, Oregon area. And 22 years ago, became a police officer in Southwest Washington State.
Excellent. So, moving on to some of the subjects that's important to us on Evolution Security podcast. I know that you train in both modern martial arts and traditional martial arts. However, I also am aware that you have a passion for traditional martial arts. Specifically, I believe you live a life dedicated to Budo. Can you take a little bit of time and discuss that philosophy and that lifestyle?
Yeah, and it's kind of I guess an alternative path towards it. Actually, when I was in the police academy, I'd already been grappling for a little while with kind of an ad hoc group that was wasn't really straight jiu-jitsu. We had like judo guys and BJJ guys. And back then it was, basically BJJ meant somebody had a couple seminars with somebody. We really didn't have anybody of rank locally other than probably the SBG group. And I was training I had a different training path, so really wasn't hooked up with those guys. When I was at the academy, I trained in something called a wrestling, which was King County Deputy, now retired, Don Gula, who was trying to bring together his experience in traditional martial arts, some judo, some Kali, karate, and then also he was also doing BJJ. And he was trying to bring that together with weapons and tactics, but very police-centric at the time. He's since expanded. When I got out of the academy, I was still interested in the grappling. I saw that was something that was pretty critical for this line of work, and was looking for something that kind of combined weapons and grappling, and found out about a group of disciplines called the Koryu or Koryu Bujutsu, which is our classical Japanese martial arts. At the time, they were pretty rare, but Seattle was pretty rare outside of Japan. But Seattle was a hub for several different instructors, one of whom is a guy by the name of Ellis Amder, who was teaching a couple of different disciplines, one of which was something called the Arakiryu. And it combines weapons and grappling. And so I was like, oh, that looks interesting. I had done some traditional Chinese arts for a while, but really wasn't interested or involved in a lot of the weapon stuff. And I was specifically looking for something which linked weapons and grappling. So kind of tracked him down kind of in the early years of the internet, and managed to get an invitation to come up and observe training, and then ended up training with him for several years as I was, continuing my career as a police officer. That really what kind of got me interested in specifically, I guess, a Koryu approach, which is somewhat different than what you would find in the more modern Budo forms. I went through a period after that where I was getting really heavily involved in SWAT and doing other things, and decided at the time that there really wasn't anything in that Koryu Bujutsu that really was direct application for the things that I felt I needed for the job. And so I moved on to combat sport grappling, and basically went into judo. I was pretty heavy in judo at that time, and spent the next 5 years or so in judo, while I was also kind of bouncing back and forth with BJJ, doing seminars and stuff. But over the years, I've had a number of different situations at work, a number of different encounters, which actually started making me think back towards, hey, wow, that was exactly like this particular kata within the ryu I'd studied, or wow, that situation was very similar to some of the things that I had been taught within the teachings of the Arakiryu in particular, but also other things that I had read and researched within the Koryu. And then, interestingly enough, another indicator for me was actually training with Craig. The first time he came out to do ECQC, a friend of mine who was a longtime practitioner of Koryu arts, including one of the oldest ones, one of the most famous ones, called Katori Shintoryu, one of the ones that was actually popularized by Don Draeger. He took ECQC with me, and at a little sidebar during one of the early parts of the training, this is true Bujutsu. And it really kind of struck a chord in me, because I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I really just started seeing a lot of connections after that. And then after I had more experiences at work, I was like, wow, I think I missed the boat. I missed something in some of the training that I was doing, started looking back into it, explored a bunch of different schools, trained in one for another one for over a year or so, and others were just kind of seminars or going in and just kind of doing some knowledge exchanges with practitioners. And really nothing had what I was looking for, what I had found, I thought, within Aracadu, and then ultimately ended up over a period of years, ended up reconnecting with Ellis and initially dealing with a lot of the more mental and psychological aspects, strategic aspects of the training, and then ultimately just ended up continuing to train with him. He opened up the school to a different format, which was a little bit more suited to kind of what I was looking for, and has since acquired a number of other law enforcement students and other people that do this thing with him.
That's awesome, Chris. It's interesting. I don't think we had talked about that. That piece of how you got to the weapons-based grappling and weapons-based integration. So that's very interesting. I'm glad to learn that.
Yeah, that was it for me. It was having done the grappling prior to, and I actually got involved in grappling because I was doing security work prior to that and gotten a couple of scrapes doing that kind of stuff, and realized that the kung fu and other stuff that I had trained wasn't really suited to that up close and personal, really surprise type violent situation that is what normally occurs in either a professional setting or in the kinds of encounters that you may deal with out in the real world. And so I realized, hey, I need to learn how to fight at close quarters. I need to learn how to grapple. And right about then was when UFC was starting to catch fire, and people were starting to comment about this Hoist Gracie guy and what he was doing in the UFC. And I watched one and I said, wow, that's really interesting. And managed to connect with some people who I worked with who were doing that kind of ad hoc wrestling group or grappling group. And so I just joined in with them. And then after that, I was bitten by the grappling bug. That was it for me.
Hey, Chris, Brian here. That's I'm really enjoying hearing how you came to be there, and that is something that I feel like I've noticed. I've got some connection with some departments and stuff, and privy to a little bit of their training. And although they teach some hand-to-hand tactics, I really feel like grappling is missing out a lot of those programs. So that's just awesome to see that integration of that into what you do, because really, I would say it's way more common that you're going to get into a scrap than a gunfight. Especially with the kind of folks that, shall we say, customers that you guys deal with. That's just going to be typically somebody's going to be acting out. But the question I've got for you is, and this might be hard for you to answer depending on your background, and some people may not understand that there is such differences between these things. But what is your favorite martial arts discipline?
I've been thinking about that, and that's hard to answer outside of just saying simply grappling, because, having done judo and jiu-jitsu, and within that jiu-jitsu, I've done a lot of no-gi. When I was in judo, I got to kind of cross-train with a lot of wrestlers and a couple guys that were Team Quest fighters and stuff. And then within that initial grappling group, I was training with a lot of wrestlers and guys who came from very, varied backgrounds. I think that either, say, wrestling or judo or BJJ, gi or no gi, or even like, say, MMA or MMA-based grappling, all of them have a piece of the puzzle that is useful. But none of them really meet the situations and the needs of particularly of the arm grappling environment. And some of them have some biases as far as, say, with BJJ, it's a bias to go to the ground that that need to be adjusted, I guess I should say, or adapted to the needs of law enforcement in particular. And that has been my driving force. While I love to grapple, I love to do jiu-jitsu, I love to do judo, I've really had to make a separation between this is kind of having fun, this is an element or an aspect of what I do, versus if I look at the total discipline that I consider my favorite discipline, it would be that integration of the armed element with the grappling element. And I think that's another reason that kind of drew me back towards the classical disciplines that had that, as well as keeps me going back to Craig, because oddly enough, what Craig does is absolutely in line and in sync with properly taught classical grappling disciplines. The one of the terms that is used is kogusoku. What Craig teaches is absolutely in line with it. He's coming from a very different perspective, uses different language, but it's the same stuff. And that would be my favorite, if that makes sense.
Hey, Chris, Aaron here. Thank you so much for your service as a police officer. Now, that said, with the current animosity towards law enforcement in the mass media, we just wanted to extend our gratitude to you and your brothers and sisters in law enforcement. Now, what would you say led you to a career in law enforcement?
Actually, it was being involved in martial arts. After doing martial arts, after getting involved in martial arts for a few years, I started to wonder if all this stuff actually worked. I was like, wow, there's all these things that we're learning, and there's all this stuff that people say is going to happen. And I just was like, I don't know. And I kind of caught on fairly quickly that a lot of the teachers teaching really didn't know either, even though they wouldn't obviously say that, probably most of them. And so I decided, hey, I need to kind of find a way to test this stuff. I was pretty heavily involved with Asian martial arts, Chinese martial arts. I was really interested in, to the point that I actually traveled to China and studied in China with the intention to stay there for quite a long time. Came back due to some family issues, but was really determined to get back to Asia. However, I was in the middle of finishing my college degree and was thinking about a law enforcement career, in particular at the time, federal law enforcement after that, because my thought was, what better way to test this stuff than to serve as either a soldier or a police officer. I've got a immune condition that doesn't allow me to be a soldier, because I tried and they were like, yeah, no, you wouldn't be accepted. So law enforcement was the next best thing, and just started to kind of go down that road. That's what got me into the security job in the first place. I was doing something while I was going through college in order to start to develop some of the basic skills I might need in law enforcement. And the first thing that showed me was, after several different physical altercations, like we just talked about, what I was doing really wasn't suitable. And so that caused me to keep looking further. But the whole impetus was testing this stuff that I was studying, to see if it actually worked, but wanting to do so in a socially acceptable manner. I didn't want to go to bars and pick fights or anything like that.
Roger. So this may lead a little to that, what you just described about, getting in those scraps when you're in security. But, in most cases, for most of us, there's moments or situations in our lives that, kind of define our path, that really set us in a direction. In some of those cases, they may cause us to train harder or change something in our path. Are there any defining moments in your path that you'd be willing to share with us?
Like specifically the martial arts path?
Well, really, yeah. I mean, you can keep it to martial arts, but just like in your development of where you're at, is there anything that caused you to want to really train harder in your law enforcement, endeavor?
It seems like maybe what could be explained is, were there any major altercations that made you rethink what you were doing?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, the first one would be when I was doing that hotel security gig. The worst unarmed physical encounter I've ever been involved in was as a hotel security guard. Has not been as a police officer. part of that was, frankly, I didn't know how to fight back then. But it was a pretty hairy confrontation with a guy who was drunk and was running around on the roof of the hotel, and saw him. I was alone. I was on the night shift at the time. I saw him, and he sees me, see him. He runs away and runs over. I can tell, to the other side of the hotel. I run around the hotel and I catch him as he's coming down off the roof. And I'm like, hey, you need to stay here. I'm calling the police, and we're going to trespass you. And he wanted nothing to do with that. He was about my age, my size, and he had his girlfriend with him, but she was, I think, more drunk than he was, and she was kind of a little bit off and away. And he starts to just kind of bow up and start talking tough. And I'm like, dude, you need to stay here. And he just completely, by surprise, kind of chest jacks me and knocks me down. And then he comes up on top of me and starts trying to hit me. I had to climb my way up him. We're battling back and forth. And at the time, again, I know nothing. And it's like, we are literally, at kissing distance. And so none of my kung fu stuff, it's like I can't hit him with these fancy moves or anything. And I managed to get him down. He starts jamming his thumb in my eye. And I'm thinking he's about to do some real damage. So the only thing I could do is I basically take him and I ram his face into a wall, breaking his nose, put him down on the ground. I mount him at that point, not knowing what our mount was. And then I'm kind of grabbing onto him and pushing his head down into the ground. He starts gurgling because he's bleeding, and I think he's probably drinking his own blood at that point. And I actually got scared. I'm like, oh, I don't want to seriously hurt this guy any more than has already happened. And so got back off and managed to get handcuffs on him, which I have no recollection of how I managed to do that. And then he kept bucking and rolling and doing all sorts of stuff even after the cuffs. And I was just holding him down, waiting for the cops to get there. They eventually got there and they took him away, arrested him and stuff like that. But that was probably the wake up call of I need to do something that's a lot more effective. Once I gotten into the grappling and into jiu-jitsu and then later judo, a lot of stuff, certainly the low-level stuff, becomes so much easier. You have a level of physical confidence after you've got that kind of skill set. Most people that you deal with have none. You definitely have to address issues such as some people who are like super emotionally disturbed, people who are having some kind of drug psychosis, meth psychosis, something like that, because they can be a huge handful even if they have no skills. But probably the next thing, oddly enough, that really impacted how I thought about martial arts in relation to the job was when I got shot in 2007. And that was at close quarters, but it wasn't an ECQC encounter. There was no hand-to-hand involved in it. But it really was it sort of crystallized all the elements about mindset, all the elements about some of these things that within the traditional Budo you hear about, like Mushin and Zanshin and things like that, all crystallized in those moments when that happened, and just confirmed everything that I had ever done in training. It was like just a stamp of, yes, see, there's something legitimate here. I'm not saying you can't get that in other places, because obviously people do. But for me, the vehicle that I think allowed me to maintain through that situation was certainly my martial arts training.
Well, Chris, it certainly is, interesting to hear some of these stories, which I'm aware of, a lot of it. But what we do in this community of folks that are either in law enforcement, military, or folks that really care about both themselves and their family, getting home. This is where it's really at, and I think you would agree. We don't want to disparage, some traditional martial arts that do not train with pressure. But let's face it, that I think is what we would probably agree on. Is as long as the system is being tested under pressure, then that's really what proves if it does work. And I think that's why, some of the odd kung fus and stuff like that, I don't want to insult folks, but there's other systems. Shoot, Taekwondo, the sport version of Taekwondo doesn't have a lot of relevance to the street. And that's where I had my beginnings. And, I definitely faced, 3 or 4 years into that. It's like, you know what, I gotta learn some grappling. So that kind of started that journey for me. But anyway, thanks for sharing all that, because that's what we're looking for. What causes, a person in law enforcement to move into the interdisciplinary system. So thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that you see within traditional martial arts, or even combat sports, is that they take the surprise element, they take the asymmetric element out of it. Most real encounters that are not kind of sort of drunken punch ups in a bar where it's really just two guys kind of comparing egos, that they're I call those duels. Those are duel based systems. And for real world situations, you want to do everything you can to avoid a duel. And yet everything that gets taught in martial arts is based on a one-on-one, equal initiative, unarmed or armed even duel. And that's not how, truly malevolent violence goes down. And the speed of a asymmetric encounter, the proximity, the very close distance of an asymmetric encounter, that high level of intensity, just does not get replicated in a situation where you're already aware. You're aware of who that opponent is across the map from you. You're aware of what they're going to do to you. They may beat you, they may overwhelm you, but within certain parameters. When those parameters are completely open, it changes things dramatically.
Well, and that is, you hit it on the head. Unequal initiative, the possibility of having weapons involved or not having weapons, the usage of ambush tactics and ruses and all of those things that are not involved in, regular martial arts, either practice or competition, so on and so forth. We know that the sport element is positive. I think we've well established that either on this show or in other realms. But most certainly, the piece that folks need to be training is just like what we do in these types of ECQC courses, or close quarter solutions like we've done in our training group here at in the Olympia area, is that we add all of those elements. Would you agree to that, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the problems within the traditional martial arts is they've removed the opposed element, and the only place you can find that opposed element is in combat sports. And so you almost have to do that kind of thing in order to get that element back into the martial arts. One of the things about traditional martial arts, if you really dig into the history of them, most of them used to have that. Most of them, that's how they were developed. They came up in an opposed format. They came up either through basically real world or real weapon dueling, down to dueling with wooden implements that were supposed to be safer, but that still caused serious injury or death. And then on up into unarmed altercations or unarmed competitions, really. A lot of that just went by the wayside. In basically, in certainly after about the 1800s, a lot of that went by the wayside in traditional arts. And so on some level, it's like they're not training traditionally anymore. They're not training the way the art used to be practiced because they're not fighting. They're not doing those things that their ancestors, their forebears did as a matter of course. I mean, a lot of them actually had jobs, either military jobs in China, the Chinese martial arts. A lot of them came up. They were convoy guards. They were doing other things that involved using their martial arts in a real world context. And then when they were training, they're also having these, inter-school fights and competitions and all that other stuff. That's all gone now for the most part. And so the only place you can really get that is combat sport.
Well, and I think you hit it on the head. During that period of time, folks were getting comfortable. And prior to that, earlier, before the 1800s or even further back, folks had to train that way. And I think that's what we ran into prior to the UFC is folks got comfortable. And, the dueling type martial arts simply kind of fell into that rut. And I think, you're just seeing history repeat itself, maybe is what it's a factor of. But moving on, Chris, I wanted to really hit on your website. Your website, In Harm's Way blog, is an excellent source for a study of martial arts, self-protection, and lessons learned in life and death encounters. And I want to, ask the audience, if you're not a subscriber or at least, a person that goes by Chris's website, please do that, because there's superb information on there that Chris covers and looks at, life and death situations, shootings, that are in the current realm, or looking back at older shootings or self-defense situations, and analyzes them and pulls out the lessons for us. So please go and see that. But I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you. Thank you. Yeah, anybody, I love the interaction. I'm not really out there in social media or anything. I don't want to be at this point. And so kind of the way I communicate with the world is kind of through that blog. And I think sometimes people might be surprised with some of the stuff that I write, but sometimes I think a little differently than what the received wisdom is, or what maybe what might be the conventionally accepted beliefs that a lot of people have, even within, I think, the multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary community. So, I'm more than happy to talk about stuff that people might disagree with, what have you. Please come by.
Yeah, you most certainly are not afraid to go against the grain. You're an intellectual thinker, and, that's why I appreciate your blog very much so. And I want to make sure that the folks know the actual website, which is inharmswayblog.com. I got that correct, Chris?
Yeah, it's a WordPress site. So if you did In Harm's Way WordPress, if all you do is In Harm's Way, you get all sorts of movies and all sorts of weird stuff.
Okay, well, good. We'll make sure you guys visit that.
Hey, Chris, what is your current deep dive as it relates to the interdisciplinary approach?
Now it would be edged weapons, and not just because I did the EWO course last weekend now, or 2 weekends ago. Now it's edged weapons. I think that there is a element within edged weapons work that is different and more challenging in a way than working with a pistol at close quarters. Mm-hmm. Ultimately with the pistol, I can always, if I can get a hold of that slide, I can avert the muzzle, and I can also basically disable the weapon. If the guy's deciding to still shoot while I got a hold of it, I can disable the weapon. I certainly don't want that weapon hitting me a lot, of course, but you can't just do that with a blade, because you could suffer a lot of damage. And so that's really been a real interest lately, because I do think if there's a particular discipline that really instills the weapons-based mentality within the grappling context or within the close quarters context, I think it's edge weapons, particularly short edge weapons, the short knives and things like that. And so that's really where we've been working a lot lately.
Nice. No, and I understand that. There's definitely an application for that stuff, because you see guys, carrying a hunting knife in hunting season, that's fine. That's really inappropriate for anything up close. You're not going to get it out of the sheath, So I definitely understand, and I work with a couple knife makers that actually focus on that stuff, and they do them for special ops guys and stuff, and they carry that stuff 24/7 when they're in country, and that's because that is a very, very important line of defense. So if you could push any student or friend or peer, someone that came and asked, into a specific focus, and again, I know that would be specific on the person, but if there was one thing you could tell most people to focus on and train, what would it be?
Would be awareness, and would be the contact management stuff. What Craig calls muck. We kind of have a shorthand. We call it threat assessment and communication. But unquestionably, that's the most valuable stuff of this stuff that we do. Unquestionably, most people have a lot of loading and a lot of cognitive dissonance going on when they are being preyed upon, and not simply by a criminal. It's not often, frankly, a criminal assault. Often it is manipulation. Often it is some other way, that intimidation, bullying, that people are trying to assert themselves over you. And to have that knowledge and awareness and ability to function in that environment really cuts across all realms of self-defense, and also kind of personal integrity. Because then that way, you learn how to not let people bully you, to include a boss, or include, maybe even family members, et cetera.
Awesome. No, we agree with that 100%, because the best confrontation you can have is one that you avoid, and that's what awareness can bring you to. So that's
right.
We're not done here, but that kind of wraps up like the formal questions. So now we're gonna
Sure.
hit you with a couple of fun ones, maybe fun for us anyway. So I got a couple, and then I think Aaron's got a couple. So what are you reading currently?
Oh God, how much time do you have?
Oh, I like that answer already.
Yeah, I'm a really big reader. I read a lot of stuff to the point where, I got guys sending me, podcasts and blogs. You got to listen to this and this and that. I've got so much reading to do that I haven't been doing really any of the other stuff. And then I got onto Scribd, and so I get most of the books I want to read are actually on there. So what I'm reading, let me see. So I'm reading an account of the Norco shootout in 1980 in the Inland Empire in California. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Was a huge bank robbery thing that went way south really badly, and ended up with a huge run and gun battle. It's a fascinating story about that. And it goes into both sides, both the law enforcement side and the criminal side, and kind of what everybody was thinking and stuff. There's some very interesting elements in there from a psychological perspective as to stuff that happens during and then in the aftermath of critical incidents and shootings and things like that. So that's been a good one. I just picked up something called Dangerous Instincts that I just started digging into, and it's a book by a former FBI profiler. I want to say it's Mary O'Toole, and talks about essentially a lot of that threat assessment and contact management stuff, about how not to trust your instincts and intuition, how a lot of times that's wrong, but that there are certain behaviors and certain patterns you can recognize with not simply, somebody who's about to criminally assault you, but also, hey, why you might not want to go out with that guy, or maybe you might not want to hire this person over here, or even she even gets into internet correspondence and internet interactions with people who you might be dealing with some crazy people and getting too far into the weeds with them. So that I'm rereading Left of Bang at the same time, which I find to be an excellent book. Regarding, and maybe a little more scientific, I guess, regarding awareness and being prepared for violence to happen suddenly. I am addicted to historical work, and I mean like scholarly work, especially related to Sengoku era Japan, having obviously to do with some of my other interests. And so I just picked up a book called The Culture of Civil War in Kyoto. It deals specifically with basically after the Onin War in Japan, which was 1467 to 77, something like that, and just the effect on the culture and warrior culture and all the different factions and everybody that was all kind of warring and all the different things that were happening around Kyoto, which was the capital at the time, for the next about 100 years. So that's been pretty fascinating, but very dry if you're not into that kind of reading.
Yeah, I can understand that. Some of that stuff is just a lot of dates, figures, and names. So
yeah. And if you do, I mean, some of it is you got to kind of have to understand some of when they start bringing up historical periods or they start bringing up, different things that were occurring and they're using the terms. It's like sometimes you can just swim like, what the heck does that mean? So since I'm into that kind of stuff, it's a little less challenging.
Right.
But those are the main ones that I'm reading right now.
Well, that's an awesome response. It's definitely that's great to hear, because that is one thing that I hear from most people that are good at what they do, is that they really do a lot of reading and a lot of knowledge gathering, in the field that they're in. And that goes above and beyond. I mean, you could train every day and not get what you get from training twice a week and learning, so.
Oh, absolutely. Cool. Yeah. And I really liked, I actually just finished both of Jocko Willink's books, Jocko and Leif Babin's books. And in particular, I really like The Dichotomy of Leadership. I believe that has probably been the most practical leadership book I've ever read, because it's very just succinct and concrete, and they give examples that, in particular, I think if you're in any kind of a team environment, especially a team environment where, you're dealing with criminal suspects or, in their case, terrorists and stuff, that just is a fantastic book, and a fantastic book about personal ownership, obviously following on their first one, but that was an excellent book as well.
No, I feel bad for not having read it yet. It is actually in my Amazon cart at the moment, so I will be bringing that one home. But it is just having listened to him speak about it. There's things that you can use in everyday life for that too. So
absolutely.
Definitely for sure on the team aspect, without a doubt. But don't not read that because you hear team or guys or special ops. That stuff, it relates to everyday life. So I got one more for you. This is
sure.
I don't think we want to go into kit necessarily, because that'd probably be a half-hour conversation in itself. But what's your favorite entry weapon?
My favorite entry weapon is my Daniel Defense AR that we're running. That's kind of the team issue, and I spent a lot of years running an MP5. So that's my SWAT career started back then. I like some of the ability to move with that thing and everything, but you just, for ease of shooting and for, just the kind of state of the art and everything that we're dealing with now, I think that's absolutely the way to go.
Right. Now, are those 10.5s or barrel?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And one, just last one, do you want to share what your personal carry is?
I've sort of slowly become a Glock guy. For duty, it's a 17 with a loopholed red dot on it, and then off duty, I'm carrying either a 19 or a Glock 43. The 43 is kind of the everyday carry, and the 19 is when I go to certain places, or sometimes when we have to do some stuff at work where we're not really undercover capacity, but we're low vis, for lack of a better word. I'll run that.
Yeah, I like to call it considerate carry.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, nice little term there. So, hey, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron. He's got a couple more for you.
Hey, Chris. Yeah. In this show, we are trying to get a lot of information out there that is not just martial arts. So I'd like to ask you, what are some things that you enjoy that are quite a bit of ways outside of martial arts, shooting, and let's even say even outside of history of war and et cetera?
When I have time, for a little while I was getting into snowboarding. My wife is a big snowboarder, and she's really interested in that. So from a physical perspective, athletic recreational perspective, I was doing that. I was really enjoying it. I mean, I'm well past the age where I can do any tricks or anything like that, but that was way outside my comfort zone. And it was something that I wanted to kind of challenge myself with, and have really enjoyed that when I've had the chance to go up. In recent, this last year, I didn't get a chance. I think I went up once. But when I can do that, I have a lot of fun doing that. I'm at home a lot on my days off because I usually have my daughter. And so it's obviously spending time with her, listening to her music, unfortunately, but also just cooking and things like that. And for some reason, I really love watching, shows with, renowned chefs, really high level chefs, talking about their training and their experience and stuff. I think there's a really interesting crossover to what we do. Not in terms of physical skills or the kinds of the things that we do, but certainly in terms of a commitment to a craft, that ownership aspect of it. I think that's really, that fascinates me. And then interesting enough, also comics. I like interviews with comedians, and I like hearing about comedians and how they kind of developed themselves and how they kind of came up in the world and everything. I think again there's another connection there, and it's so outside of what we do. With comics, maybe not that far outside, because they interact with people, they assess people. They're really really good at the human intelligence, understanding people, understanding motivations and things like that. And then also being able to kind of react to it quickly in terms of coming up with jokes and doing things off the top of their head. That I think there's a lot of crossover and interest there as well.
Wow, interesting points. I'll tell you, I love cooking shows too. In my former life, I was a professional guitar player, and I would gig 5 nights a week, and I would get home at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the most relaxing thing for me to get to sleep was to watch cooking shows. So I can definitely relate. That's pretty cool. Well, speaking of music, now here's another question that I really like to hear is, what are your either five favorite bands or your 5 favorite musicians, or, just get to know what kind of music you're into?
I'm a big old school metalhead. I grew up, just loving that stuff. Among my favorites certainly would be Judas Priest, and I just recently got to see them. And it's a mate, Rob Halford. It's still amazing, at his age. I'm going to be going to see Iron Maiden here pretty soon again. So they're definitely 2 of my favorites. I am a huge fan of Michael Schenker and Lee John Roth, who were both guitar players for the Scorpions. Oh, yeah. And then went off and did their own thing. Just absolute geniuses. Schenker in particular was sort of my god when I was coming up. For more recently, Chris Cornell I was a huge fan of Chris Cornell's. I mean, he's one of the few people when I heard about his suicide where it literally took me aback, because I loved his work. I loved him as a singer. I loved what he did, everything he did. And then, other than that, I listen to a lot of modern sort of hip hoppy, poppy stuff because I'm constantly with my daughter and she's constantly listening to stuff. And I actually like some of it. So, I don't know if you guys have heard of these people, but like Billie Eilish is a big one. BTS, which is a Korean K-pop group that we actually went down to LA to see. Believe it or not, I've kind of slowly grown to really enjoy them. They're an interesting band. So stuff like that, which is kind of all over the place.
Well, man, great answers. I love the old metal. I'm influenced by that myself. I'm more of a late '80s, early '90s guitar influenced guy, but I can definitely relate also to the Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. And yeah, Chris Cornell, that really broke me up when when we found out that he had committed suicide. A real bummer there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, one last thing, and I think we can let you go here. Really appreciate your time. Now, if you could leave the audience with some advice from your experience, what would it be?
That's a good question. Well, okay. So I guess I would say this, and something that I have been another kind of area of study that I've been getting into lately, and reading a lot on, and something that I've used to kind of offer to several people recently. I'm part of our peer support group, which means we deal with not only critical incidents where we kind of help officers when they're going through things like that, but also even personal events and things like that. And a lot of times what I'm telling people now is to read the Stoics. There is a lot of wisdom that is absolutely applicable today. And I think it really helps reframe a lot of the crap that we're just constantly bombarded with our political situation, with our media situation, with all that. It's literally makes you soul sick. And I think that the Stoics offer an antidote to that in part, which isn't removing yourself completely from the world and, basically ignoring it all and everything. It's kind of being tranquil in the midst of all that, or as tranquil as you can be. And so I think reading that stuff, listening to kind of Stoic podcasts, getting involved in it would be the advice that I would offer. It's been helpful for me.
Well, good. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Chris, I would like to, circle back to your Stoics comment. I can't agree with that more. That's something that has helped me greatly in just the recent, year or so through some stuff that I've been going through. But so maybe I'm pronouncing this right. Epictetus and Seneca are the two that I've been kind of reading a little more on myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Marcus Aurelius is he's kind of like a Zen master, I guess. So there are parts of reading him where you're like, oh yeah, no, that's great. Wow, that's really good advice. And then there's others where you're like, what is he talking about? And when you understand that his writings were intended for him and him alone, and they were not intended for publication. They were not intended to teach other people. So it makes sense as almost little shorthands or things where he might be referring to something that would have jogged his memory, but which we have no connection to. Seneca, I like how he gets much more in depth. And so to me, he's easier to read. It's easier to follow. He's easier to kind of take lessons from it. But to me, they're all things that you just revisit over and over again, because they can be, you read something and you have one understanding at one time, and then you can come back later. It's been a while since I've read Epictetus, just because I was reading the others and then I always get distracted and go into other things. I'm waiting on starting to read a book or a book about Cato the Younger, who apparently was quite the badass, and did not leave any writings himself, but other people wrote about him. And so he's kind of the next stop on the path, I guess, that I want to delve a little bit more into.
Very, very interesting, Chris. Listen, man, that is some really good advice. Reading Stoics is superb advice. Listen, I hope that this is going to be the start of many times of you being on the show, because you've got a breadth of knowledge, and I think we can go multiple episodes with just diving into the things that you use to prepare yourself for your daily life, both in your professional life and your daily walk. So, you and I are good friends. I can't wait to see you here in a couple of months at ECQC. It's been quite a few years since we've hung out, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. No, thanks. I would love to come back. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome, Chris. Well, listen, we'll go ahead and wrap the show up, and we will certainly talk to you soon. Take care, brother.
Thank you. You too.
Man, that was a great interview with Chris. We really appreciate him spending the time to come with us and share his time. That's information we want to pass out to you guys, and just know that kind of stuff is going on and how after it he is. So we're going to talk about our drill of the week now. So we're on to the fourth evolution of that casino drill. So we're going to actually ramp this up to the full speed, full distance drill. And again, if you've been listening, this is the DT2A target that has the 6 numbers on it. And it is putting 1 bullet in the 1, 2 bullets in the 2, so on, all through the 6. But this is full speed this week. So we are 7 yards, 21-second par time. So we've done all these small steps getting up to this, and this is test week. It's like when you work out at the gym and then you go do the big back squat. So that's what we're gonna do, man. We're gonna go full speed, full distance, and see what you can do. So think about the things that we did in those previous iterations, that we did to get those shots off, to get that first one centered, where you changed mags, how you can work that way, and that's even that's a little hint. I like to change before I go to the 4 because I got 1 bullet left and I can reload and be hot with 8 rounds. So that's something, if you haven't been doing, that might be the difference between you making the par time and not making the par time, is charging up hot with 1 left. So we talked a little bit about that in one of the previous iterations as well. So that's today's drill. And with that, I'm going to move into accountability, and we're going to talk about actually shooting last week's drill and this accountability as well, because we all did it. So for this last week, I did get only 1 range time in and only 1 dry fire, but on that range time, I was able to do that drill of the 5 yards, 31 seconds, and I did only shoot it a couple times. I did some other practice work at the range, but second time through, I did shoot it clean in 17:37, and I was impressed with myself for doing that. A couple of them shots were real near the edge of the number, but they were still on the color, so they count. But that is a record for me personally on that drill. And again, that is the shortened distance, but I was actually able to pull it off clean. I did get 2 5:30 workouts in this week. Due to the fact that we record a show and I can't always keep my schedule, I did only get 1 jiu-jitsu in, though, so I was a little bummed about that. But hey, you know what? That's part of what I'm giving up to get to do this. And only got 1 barbell session in as well. But I did do a home workout, like an online CrossFit workout with a good friend of mine, Izzy, who also happens, we'll talk a little more about him on our contest. But anyhow, that was my accountability for the week. Who wants to go next?
All right, I'll give mine out here real quick. Well, so on the drill, I actually I'm going to hold myself accountable here. I actually forgot to record my time in my practice journal, so sorry about that, guys, but I do know that I did definitely get under the par time and shoot it clean. But again, sorry about missing my time on that. Now, for my workout this week, I am, like I said last time, I'm increasing my cardio workouts because we've got some pretty hefty training coming up, all 3 of us next month, guys, and I'm trying to get my resting heart rate and my stroke volume up, so I'm doing some HIIT training. I was able to get in 2 sessions in for about 40 minutes a piece. I'm doing 2 minutes high and then 40 seconds low, and doing that for 40 minutes. Like I said, I was able to get 2 in, and that felt pretty good. I only got to go to 1 JIT session this week, but the great thing is it was with my wife. she's a great partner. Again, I'll have to say, because she's better than me, so she helps me out. So now one of the great things I got to do is I got to take a private shooting lesson from someone who is going to be a future guest real soon. We're working to get him in, but I'll tell you what, guys, I am probably going to change my way of getting shooting training. Now, there's the tactical training side of everything. There's the interdisciplinary training, like ShivWorks offers and like we offer. But I'm telling you, private technical shooting instruction, I think, is the way to go, because, I mean, I'm telling you, in one session, this guy really helped me with my shooting. I'll expound on that more when we get him on the air, but I'll tell you guys, that was a lot of fun, and I have another session with him in a couple of weeks. But I'm telling you, this is the way to get better, is get with guys that can privately coach you. So just encourage you guys, if you guys can, and our listeners, to get out there and try and get some private lessons. That's it for me for the week.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. That's an awesome week for you, man. Both you and Brian got after it for sure. So for my accountability, I had said maybe one episode or so ago that I was going to make sure I turned up my dry fire. So I got every day this week, I had gotten a dry fire session in. I shot the drill of the week. I went ahead and took my time. I told myself, go as slow, try to make it under 31, but I went ahead and went slow and precise. So I actually shot it in 28.58 seconds, but it was all clean, and I decided to take the part time, so it was kind of fun doing it that way. So there's the drill, and I had 2 JIT sessions, but most importantly is Lance Corporal Davis, my son, was in town, and so I got to do one session with him, which made me extremely happy. I would say it made my year. So that was a blast. I got 2 early morning workouts done, and I also completed 2 lectures and the reading for my Hillsdale American Heritage course. So that's about it for me.
Well, man, that's good stuff. We're all still keeping after it, even though, sometimes schedule doesn't always allow you to get everything you want in. The point is, show up, suit up, and get it done, and that's really what it seems like we're doing here. So, you guys have anything else to add, or you want to wrap it for the week?
I think that's good.
Awesome. Cool. Hey, it's always fun recording with you guys. So until next time, you guys take care.
Take care.
Hey, you've been hearing that spot at the beginning of our show about Tenacore, and, we announced a contest, and we were going to give away a holster. Well, a few of you actually did what we asked you to and posted up on Instagram, and we put some names in a hat, and hey, it looks like Izzy won a holster. We're going to be giving that code to him so he can order whatever he wants from the Tenacore site. But the great news is we're going to give away another one. How cool is that, guys?
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, congratulations, Izzy. It's kind of fun doing that. Actually, when Brian and I did the drawing, it was hilarious. We just wrote all the names that had entered on a piece of paper, pulled them, ripped them up into the hat, and I shook them around, and Brian chose the name. It was kind of fun, honestly. So that's cool that way.
Yeah, and hey, this time you listen to the spot at the end, and you'll hear how to enter. We're gonna have Facebook and Instagram this time, and again, this will be for a Tenacore holster, your choice. So again, congratulations, Izzy, and good work, everybody else that shared the podcast, because that's really what it's about, is just helping us get this message out there. So thanks again. Hey, if you guys want to be like Izzy and win yourself a free Tenacore holster, easy to do. We're giving away another one. What you need to do is either go to Facebook or Instagram. On Facebook, we're Evolution Security, and on Instagram at EvoSecUSA. On either of those platforms, there will be a post about the contest. We'll also explain what you need to do, but what you need to do is tag someone in a comment on either of those sites. Find a buddy, find a friend. All you need to do is reply with a name so that we're throwing another name out there, and then they can come enter if they want to. Share the podcast with someone and subscribe to our podcast on the multiple platforms we're on. Real easy, real free holster. Take care.